Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's Tech Forum session. My name is Monique Monjon. I'm a project manager at BookNet Canada. Today, we are presenting Working Towards eBooks for Everyone. Before we get started, BookNet Canada acknowledges that its physical office is upon the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat Indigenous peoples, the original nations of this land that we now call Toronto. BookNet's operations are currently remote, and our staff contributes their work from these traditional territories, as well as those of the Mi'kmaq people from the lands we now call Beaton, Brampton, Guelph, Halifax, and Vaughan. We encourage you to visit the nativeland.ca website to learn more about the peoples whose land you are joining from today. Moreover, BookNet endorses the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada and supports an ongoing shift from gatekeeping to space making in the book industry. The book industry has long been an industry of gatekeeping. Anyone who works at any stage of the book supply chain carries a responsibility to serve readers by publishing, promoting, and supplying works that represent the wide extent of human experiences and identities in all its complicated intersectionality. We at BookNet are committed to working with our partners in the industry as we move toward a framework that supports space making, which encourages that marginalized creators and professionals all have the opportunity to contribute, work, and lead. If you're having difficulties with Zoom or any tech-related questions, please put your questions in the chat, or you can email techforum@booknetcanada.ca. We are providing live ASL and closed captioning for this presentation. To see the captions, please find the Show Subtitle button in the Zoom menu at the bottom of your screen. If during the presentation you have questions for the speakers, please use the Q&A panel found in the bottom menu. Lastly, we'd like to remind attendees of the Code of Conduct. Please do be kind, be inclusive, be respectful of others, including of their privacy, be aware of your words and actions, and please report any violations of this code to techforum@booknetcanada.ca. Please do not harass speakers, hosts, or attendees, or record these sessions. We have a zero tolerance policy. You can find the entire code of conduct at techforum.booknetcanada.ca/code of conduct. Now, I have the great pleasure of introducing our speakers. Tam Light has been supporting book sales in Canada for more than 15 years. A former student librarian and bookseller, Tan worked with the digital sales and marketing department at Random House for 5 years before joining the Literary Press Group of Canada as sales manager. For the past decade, she has worked in partnership with the Canadian Manda Group to bring thousands of independently published works of Canadian literature to the attention of booksellers and librarians. Next, we have Sahiba Shah, a graduate of TMU's publishing program. Previously, she has worked as an information and loans assistant at the UTM Library, a marketing intern at Scholastic Canada, and as a freelance editor. She first joined eBOUND as a digital services intern, assisting with various ebook accessibility projects. She enjoys fantasy novels, Studio Ghibli movies, and making art in her spare time. Sarah Jensen is the ebook coordinator and junior acquisitions editor at Cormorant Books, an independent Canadian publishing house. She graduated from Humber's Creative Book Publishing program in 2017 and started working for Cormorant shortly afterwards. Sarah recently completed Benetech's Global Certified Accessible program and received certification for Cormorant and its children's imprint, DCB. And lastly, but not least, of course, we have Ashley Fortier, is the co-publisher of Metonymy Press, a small queer publisher based in Montreal, Montreal. I'll turn it over to our panelists.
Thank you, Mo. So first thing that I want to do today is give you a quick kind of rundown of our project. 23 LPG publishers submitted over 650 titles to our accessible digital books conversion project. We collected both PDFs and any existing EPUBs so that they could be assessed for accessibility upgrades. We worked with eBOUND and Apex, who won our conversion bid, and they began the work on conversion about a year ago. Our files were ameliorated and returned via eBOUND, who did quality testing on a percentage of the files. And then our project coordinator also tested a percentage of the files and sent them back to our publishers. A big shout out to Bella, who then supported our publishers through a quality assurance process that was extensive. And over the spring and summer, our files were either approved or the corrections were reported and then delivered back up the chain. Where some of our publishers had capacity in-house, those corrections could be completed by the publishers, and others had to outsource that part of the process. During this time, we also encouraged our publishers to address their Onyx and to introduce accessible ebook Onyx education to our PD roster so that we could support that process. Approved and finalized files were delivered to our publishers, to NELS and to SELA, and by the end of the summer, the newly accessible digital books were starting to hit the market. We launched eBooks for Everyone at the end of summer to highlight all of the amazing work that had been produced through this process. And an accessibility audit of our site, All It Up, allowed us to prioritize upgrades, and our listing pages were recoded so they could surface accessibility features from the book Onyx. Before we dive into the greater discussion, I want to acknowledge that it takes a community to create these accessible books. And so I want to acknowledge the work and collaboration that got us here. To thank the Canada Book Fund and their Accessible Digital Books Support for Organizations Fund, to thank eBOUND, who was our major partner in this, Apex eBook Conversion Services, who did all of our conversion work, the regional associations in Canada for sharing their resources, especially to Kay Rowlands, who collaborated quite a lot with our project coordinator, and to our engaged and enthusiastic publishers, some of whom were able to engage additional local talent to help them complete the final stages of our project. A shout out to Turner Riggs, who are our web developers, who helped us surface the accessible features for our book listings and are helping us upgrade the site, and to ZG Stories, who we've engaged to support the launch of this collection through social ads. And thank you to Nels and Sela, who are working with us now to see all of these new books deposited within their content systems. Okay, so I think we are ready to dive in. I want to take everybody back about 2 years ago when we started this project and started thinking about it and talking about it. And first, Sahiba, I want to ask you what the overall market looked like for Canadian accessible ebooks when these projects were getting going.
So before the Accessible Digital Books initiative, there were NELS and SELA catalogs, outside of which it's hard to say how many Canadian ebooks were present. As of 2021, NELS has about 50,000 titles in their collection, and 27,000 of those are EPUBs. SELA has about 1 million titles across multiple formats, including EPUBs. And then since the Accessible Digital Book initiatives kickstarted the accessibility efforts for Canadian publishers in 2019, the market has been continuously developing. So at eBOUND, we've completed several accessibility projects, starting with the BPAA conversion project, or the Book Publishers Association of Alberta, in 2020. And as of November 2022, about 2,100 titles have been converted in total, and more projects are underway. We've also partnered with Benetech to certify publishers in Benetech's Global Certified Accessible Standards. And 22 publishers have been certified as of March 2022. And then we have 22 more publishers undergoing certification, and that's to be completed by March of next year. So I'd say the market continues to develop.
Amazing. For Ashley and Sarah, I would like to hear from you about what level of experience you were starting with in the ebook space when we started this project.
Yeah, so I've been training myself kind of in accessibility for about 5 years now. When I started at Cormorant, there were a number of seminars that I could attend for free. There's a lot of free resources out there. I encourage everyone to take advantage. And I've been slowly building a knowledge since then.
Metonymy is a really small operation. It's a small press of 2 people, and so being able to be part of this project took us from having almost no eBooks in the market at all to having our very small but full catalog converted into accessible EPUBs. Myself and my co-publisher had taken some kind of introductory courses on developing ebooks years ago in our own sort of overall publishing training, but I wouldn't say that it is either of our strong suits, nor have we been able to prioritize it in the way that we would like to, just in terms of resources and what we're able to put time and money towards. So this was a huge opportunity for us.
Great. And that actually dives into my next question. What did this opportunity mean to your press? Ashley, if you want to go first and elaborate, maybe?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we as a press don't have core publisher grants, so being able to access, for example, Canada Book Fund, their accessible publishing isn't directly available to us. So being able to do so through an association like the Literary Press Group was an amazing opportunity. It was a game changer for us. So prior to being involved, we were really only able to make our books available in digital formats as PDFs that weren't meeting accessibility standards. We did have eBooks available through one trade platform, but that was because they had been converted by Apple, and they did it on their own, just for their channels, and not according to accessibility standards. So it meant that all of a sudden we could have our books in improved formats, and then work towards getting them out across multiple channels, and hopefully learn some stuff along the way to be able to continue to build that going forward, even when we don't have the support of a project like this.
And Sarah, what coming from a place where you have a larger publishing house behind you, what did the LPG project bring to Cormorant specifically?
Yeah, we were able to convert a bunch of our backlist titles, which hadn't previously been made with accessibility in mind. And it saved us a lot of money doing that, money and time in-house. I probably could have done it if I had the time, but time is not something. We're larger than 2 people, but we're 6 right now. So we're not that much bigger. But yeah, it was a huge cost saving for us.
Great. And another quick follow-up, how did you select the titles that you put forward for this project?
We chose a lot of titles that had either been course adopted or award nominated, or that we thought might have content that was trending in the industry, the popular books, I guess you would say.
And Ashley, I think you added your whole list, right?
Yes, yeah, our list was short enough that it fell within the cap that was set by LPG. There were some titles, like notably some poetry titles, that the authors decided they didn't want to make it like widely available in through trade channels, but did want to make accessible through the organizations like, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting what they stand for, but NELS and SELA. And that's just because of sort of preferences around how text shows up on a screen in a reflowable format. But we did have our whole catalog converted and just made some choices author by author, title by title, as to which channels they're then going to be made available through.
Right. And I think in general, just as like the wider piece of advice the LPG gave when we were sort of framing this, was that we wanted to give our publishers the opportunity to tackle more difficult books. So we did encourage, picture books, graphic novels, poetry, drama, anything that was maybe slightly more challenging to make accessible or to tackle the formatting. We wanted to give our publishers the opportunity to have that done with full support. All right, let's move on a little bit. I would like to know from each of you, Ashley and Sarah, what you wish you had known at the start of this project. Maybe Ashley, you could go first.
Sure. I think certainly the time that is involved, especially in the quality assurance steps. I think, perhaps naively, when we initially got involved, we're like, sweet, we can just ship things off and they'll be converted, and this is what we've always wanted. And it's, but of course we know our titles and we need to be able to look at them closely when they come back from the conversion partners. And specifically I would say going over close, the time it takes to really check through the alt text descriptions, making sure that in the same way that we pay close attention and care to representation in all of our work, that come through in the context of alt text as well. We also, almost all our authors include writing in languages other than English. And so I had no idea the time and requirement involved to sort of, find and flag every non-English term to be properly language coded. So yeah, those were some of the things I wish that I had known, and I think we would have done it anyways, but maybe we would have sort of mapped out the time it took and the workflow, especially wanting to, have time to check in with authors, specific questions along the way, this kind of thing.
Right. And Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, it would be similar, except I would say that also there was a lot of detail involved about each book right at the beginning. And we had kind of just rejoined the LPG and jumped on board to this project without looking at what was required. And there was a lot of, I spent a lot of time digging through eBooks, finding other languages, or if, they had images, because I had no idea what the backlist was like. So it was a lot of time inside the ebook looking for that stuff.
Right. Sahiba, I'm going to jump to you for a second. What were you surprised by any of the knowledge gaps that were surfaced during this project?
I was and wasn't. As we know, accessibility hasn't been that much of a priority for publishers until now, and there's definitely a learning curve for everyone, and now we're seeing more and more publishers better engage with the accessibility of their books, and also standards continue to evolve in the space, so it's important to continue learning about these standards and actively look for resources. And to that end, eBOUND has created or worked on creating an accessible publishing learning network called apln.ca. And the site was created to provide resources to publishers from beginner to intermediate to advanced levels. And there's also a community hub where people can engage in discussions about accessible publishing. So there are knowledge gaps, but we're continuously working to fill those in and help Canadian publishers as best as we can.
And I can say from a like a project management point of view, you know, it was a learning process for me as well to, you know, as the standards are kind of developing and changing, we had to make a couple of pivots during our project to collect, you know, new formats or additional information, working on the alt text and the language tagging was something that was sort of discussed part way through with the project instead of right from the beginning. So that's something we're looking at as we look to frame a second round as an organization, is what information can we provide up front? And even before the project starts, what can we start to, you know, put into the minds of our publishers who might want to participate in another round? How can they start to prep those processes so that they're not getting blindsided partway through with, you know, the need for language tagging or for better alt text or something like that. So we're looking to provide as much of our, you know, sort of takeaways from the first round upfront, so that we can sort of better structure and set better expectations for our publishers for the next time. I want to talk about some of the other challenges that you experienced, aside from, you know, sort of the time commitment. Ashley, was there anything else that sort of that was a challenge for you through this process?
I mean, I think that I think I felt that if I had a little bit more capacity to dig into like the code side of things, that I might have been like, you know what I mean? Like I felt like I was sort of like, I didn't know so little that I couldn't recognize that I needed to know more. So I think that there's like some training there on my end. But I mean, I will say, like, for all the sort of time and the challenges that came along the way, like, it certainly was like I don't want it to come off as like a reason to discourage. I think it's like a well worth like initiative, you know. And if it happens again, I hope that we can participate again. And even the time involved in doing that quality assurance and is not like pales in comparison to the time involved, like having to do it all yourself. You know what I mean? Like Oliver and I did produce a couple, like try to create a couple EPUBs at the very beginning of our like existence as a press, and we did, you know, work to have one of them audited by NELS and attend some of their trainings, and you know, getting back, like having not had any kind of information beforehand about what, like how to create something born accessible, and then to try and go back and look at it and make sense of like how to make the changes that were required. It, you know, it's super daunting. So that this process is obvious. It felt unwieldy in moments, but I think in comparison to not having that kind of support, like it still is like very much well worth it, and equips us going forward to know, like you said, in the same way at the organizational level, like what to let publishers know beforehand, like what we know now too, sort of, you know, like it makes me even think of like, I don't know, at what point even the development of book production in general might I just flag non-English terms from the outset, you know what I mean, to be able to then go back and find and not have to like literally read the whole book again to find them in order to language code, you know what I mean? So just like that's just like one example, but
Thank you. And Sarah, were there additional challenges that you want to flag from your perspective?
I think that because standards are still kind of in development and things change, sometimes people have different opinions on what is appropriate. Like, for example, I think we were asked to supply short and long alt text, and our long wasn't used. It was mostly for covers, and we used all the short, or the conversion people decided to use the short. And when I went through Benetech, they accepted longer alt text. They didn't tell me it was wrong. So I think that it's just, it can be a little daunting not knowing what the majority of people want. But again, it's well worth it to do it.
Yeah, I think like for us, we're going to try to provide estimates of, each stage based on our first project so that everybody sort of understands the time commitment involved. And I think we'll also maybe make things a little bit smaller for each participating publisher to manage. Because I think we accepted up to 40 titles per publisher, which I think was ambitious for some, and certainly as a whole, 650 titles was quite a big collection to manage. I want to touch on something that I think both Ashley and Sarah have mentioned now, and that's how your workflows are changing in response to your experience in this project, or also Sarah with the Benetech certification. Did you want to start, Sarah?
Yeah, I think one of the major things that we've started to try to think about beforehand is color contrast in terms of covers, especially. We don't have a lot of images on the interior, but cover images, sometimes there's a color contrast analyzer program that I think came about, that I knew of because of the LPG, this project. And I've started using it quite frequently on every book, and sometimes they fail. So I brought that to the attention. The covers are not my domain, but I brought that to the attention of our staff. And I think we're starting to think about it beforehand in cover design and development. But I also have a running checklist of things I check in every book, just from things that I know we should be checking for because we miss a step either in converting a book from our InDesign files to EPUB. Something happened. Anyway, I just have I've added to that checklist, and particularly with regards to semantics and style sheets. There's a lot more specific stuff that I should be looking for. So I've adapted that.
Great. And what about for language tagging and alt tagging? Have you made any adjustments, or?
We structure our alt according to the Benetech standards now, okay, which I like to call the pyramid of importance. I don't know if I've heard that before. It's just, put the important information first. Sorry, what did you ask me?
I also just forgot.
Alt text and language tagging.
Sorry,
language tagging.
Yeah.
Our authors tend to put foreign languages in italics, so it's quite simple for me to search for italic tagging and just add the language tags to that. There are books, however, where foreign languages are just in Roman text, so it's hard to find sometimes, but yeah.
So you are still looking for them sort of later.
Yeah. We also, because there's something called emphasis tagging as well. So visually it's italic, but it tells the screen reader to emphasize the word. So I check to make sure that all italics, all the tags are appropriate. Like if it's supposed to be emphasis, I have to change it to emphasis, but we've started to do that in the beginning. So it's less that I have to search for, but that's kind of all one step. Just
right.
different sub steps, I guess.
Great. And Ashley, you've mentioned that you've also started to look for opportunities to work some of this process into your ebook, well, production workflows.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the change for us is that we're trying to establish or formalize an ebook workflow process. We did not, you know what I mean? Like, and I think the other piece that we haven't touched on, because it was probably like it is already in place for most publishers, but I think I mentioned at the beginning, like we didn't even have like an ebook distributor prior to joining this project, and so that's like a huge step for us to be getting onboarded through eBOUND and being able to access like all the channels, as opposed to just like a real piecemeal or direct sale context, which is where we were at up until that point. And so I think, you know, it's a work in progress for us, but even because, as I said, we're still like operating with like project grants, just like making sure that when we map out our budgets that we have an appropriate set of resources, like aside for trying to actually get, you know, ebooks, and in this case, like going forward, accessible ebooks out at about the same time as the print book release, as opposed to like eventually when we can kind of thing, you know.
Right.
And it's interesting, the language, like we generally don't italicize foreign language in our books. So, I mean, for us, it was like, okay, go back to the step of having had the language editors look over stuff, but like things change between when you're working at way back then and when it ends up in the final product. So I think there's some things to work out, but certainly there's some clear steps that could happen earlier to save time when we get to the point of producing the ebooks. I think it would be interesting. I think Oliver and I both need some more training to just understand what the accessibility standards are. But right now we're literally just working on having access, like understanding how to prepare the metadata, accessing the channels, and then you know, committing to making sure that all like books going forward do get converted, so that we can maintain that standard now that we've been able to establish it with the titles that did get converted with this project.
Great. Thank you. I think next I would like to hear from each of you what your advice would be to other independent publishers who are looking to get into the accessible ebook space. Let's start with Sahiba, because you've been quiet for a while.
Definitely looking into resources about accessible publishing. Again, I'd like to mention apln.ca, as well as there's so many free resources, even from NELS online, that you can see for free. And obviously communicating with the larger publishing community out there, and just discussing any issues or asking questions, engaging in discussion. I think that's very important. And then obviously meshing accessibility into existing workflows. It doesn't have to be all at once. It can be slow and steady, just adding it on to the existing workflows in all levels of the publishing cycle. I think leaving accessibility up to just the production staff might not be ideal. I think it's good to involve everyone in the publishing cycle, from authors, editors, sales and marketing, as well as production. That way everyone has more knowledge, and everyone produces better books. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Great. Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, mine would be similar. Try to train more than one staff person in accessibility if possible. just because sometimes that one person might get stuck, and it's nice to bounce an idea off another person who's not looking at you blankly because they don't understand what you're saying. So it would definitely help, I think, to have a broader knowledge base at your company, or just have another person you can talk to about it, or be it someone at Nels or one of us, like, just feel free to talk to us, I guess.
I agree. Everyone is very generous with their knowledge in this space because things are changing and evolving. So the wider community will be one of your best resources when you're sort of getting going. So do pick our brains for sure. Ashley, what is your advice?
I mean, I think a lot has been said, but yeah, I guess I mean, if you're going from a place like we were, from like zero forward, just like having a really clear understanding of the time and resources that will be involved. And I don't know, moving forward, like ambitiously, but also realistically. Because it's, it can get easy, like it is easy to get bogged down, and it's better to sort of figure out like a sustainable pace, I guess, to work towards. I mean, any new title that you get converted into an accessible format is better than prior to not having had it. You know what I mean? And so, rather than like whatever, biting off more than you can chew and then getting discouraged and not completing, like, and just really having a clear idea of what's involved, and then accessing all the resources that are out there. Because it sounds like there are many. And, I had no idea what we were getting ourselves into, and I don't regret it at all. The two main points.
Excellent. That's good to hear. I would like to hear from Sahiba what opportunities these accessible digital books have opened up for eBOUND in terms of new sales avenues or partnerships in the accessible space.
So we've had the opportunity to partner with several provincial associations. We've conducted a lot of large-scale accessible conversion projects. We've partnered with the Association of Book Publishers of British Columbia, and of course, Book Publishers Association of Alberta, and as well as the Association of Manitoba Book Publishers. So that has been since 2020, all thanks to the Accessible Digital Books Initiative. As far as sales go, it's hard to map anything out just yet because the entire process is quite time consuming, updating metadata, ingesting the titles, and redistributing to vendors. All of that takes a lot of time, and publishers, more often than not, are more concerned with their front list rather than their back list. So the sooner the files are out there, the sooner we can see the impact of these projects. And eBOUND is also currently looking into a metadata research project to better understand user needs and discoverability for accessible ebooks and effective ways to market them. Essentially looking into best practice guides for publishers, for libraries on how to display this accessible metadata. So I think we've had a lot of opportunities and continue to have them. Thanks to these projects.
Great. And for Sarah and Ashley, are there any kind of new opportunities or new avenues that you're exploring as you grow your accessible ebook collection?
What have we done? I mean, we've sold books to the Nels Library for a couple of years now. And I didn't do it myself. We donated books, the books that we had converted and some other front lists to Bookshare in the States.
Okay.
So we're trying to contribute to these accessible libraries as much as we can. And we signed the charter of accessible publishing, I want to say it's called, with the Accessible Books Consortium. So all of that information's on our website, and if you have questions, you can contact us. I think it's info@cormorantbooks.com. You can send your questions and I'll get them. But in terms of sales, I mean, typically our marketing is based on content, not on format. So it's hard to say what we're doing there.
Ashley, were there any specific opportunities related to the accessible books?
I haven't. I would say that I've been able to identify any as related to like them specifically being accessible ebooks, or been able to delineate between that and the fact that we just didn't have our books widely available in EPUB format. But the fact that we now do is like massively expanding our sales opportunities, and certainly like library channels, like because that we didn't have our stuff through any of the distributors the libraries access. So but a lot of our books get, like relatively speaking, given the size of our catalog, get course adopted. So it's going to be really good for us to be able to access those channels. And it has sort of motivated us to just do a revamp of our own website and our own web store to be able to promote them more explicitly, and we're sort of in the process of rolling that out as well.
Great. Thanks. That actually dovetails really nicely into quickly sharing eBooks for everyone, which is the new site that the LPG launched in order to support our collection. So I want to quickly just share my screen and take you to the listing page for one of these titles to show you what it looks like. So you'll see here, I have After Alice. And what I really like is that under the ebook listing, you can see here the link to go to the accessibility details. And when I click on that link, it takes me down to a display that is pulling from the book's Onyx. And as far as we understand, All It Up is one of the first ebook retailers to display these features in this amount of detail. So we're quite proud of that. It took some handiwork from our development team to be able to, surface this information. And it is available on every ebook listing where that information is being provided. So that is really exciting. I'll just stop sharing. So in order to have this microsite come about, we did a full accessibility audit on our website, which, as I said, highlighted some key updates that we needed to make to our website and to our content system in order to be accessible to folks who use screen reading technologies and other assistive technologies, so that they could navigate our website and purchase these newly available accessible digital books. It also has a promotional content component to it. And that is going to be sort of integrated with our regular editorial content for All It Up, and function much the same way as our other microsites for poetry and for Indigenous voices. And yeah, we're looking forward to, growing that collection. Our publishers who are producing accessible digital books going forward, either through future conversion projects or through Benetech certification or other certification processes in-house, will be able to contribute to this space and to continue growing this collection and this library for readers. So that is a very exciting future to look forward to. And I think on that note, we can turn this over and ask for questions from the reading audience here today.
Amazing segue, Tan. Yeah, so we are open for questions. So if you have questions, please add them to the Q&A box using the menu at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I will start with one of the questions that has come in, and this may be more for Sahiba. Did eBOUND in its capacity as a supplier engage with publishers who may be less technically savvy and not have the in-house knowledge to translate some of the feedback they were receiving about their ebook?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the first part of that. Did eBOUND?
Yeah. In your capacity as a supplier, I guess sort of what is the strategy you've been using to work with publishers who may not have a lot of in-house technical savvy dealing with feedback on some of their EPUBs?
Well, there's definitely been a lot of filling in of the knowledge gaps. We always we always look for ways to educate our publishers as well. And we have a lot of resources on our own website, eBoundCanada.org, and then this is why we work towards apln.ca. Any questions we receive, we educate individually. Like we do meetings as well. So we're open to educating the publishers. I know that many of our publishers don't have the capacity for building that accessible publishing knowledge, and but we're here to help, and we continue to work towards educating them as best as we can. And now we're looking for future projects. We're looking into more individual education sessions with our publishers. Yeah.
And we
No
spent
small
a bit
feat.
of time. Yeah, we spent a bit of time sort of thinking about this from, okay, if I'm a publisher who's never opened an ebook before, how am I going to accomplish a Q&A process? But if I'm a publisher who knows how to make an ebook, how can I have a really thorough and in-depth Q&A process? So we tried to sort of tackle it from both angles, provide a set of instructions for somebody who might rely on something like the Daisy Reader in order to understand what's happening with their ebook, as well as for folks who were maybe a little bit more advanced and could go in and actually look at the code themselves and potentially address some of the changes even on their own. There was a very big scope of understanding in terms of what was happening in this space and in terms of capacity at each of the publishers. So we really did invest in supporting everyone and making this possible, no matter what level they were starting with.
Awesome. Have lots of great questions coming in. I'll start with this one, and this is more for our publisher panelists. Were the authors involved in any way in any sort of phase of this process, either providing alt text or other aspects of preparing these books to be published accessibly?
I don't think that we involved them at this stage, but going forward, if books require alt text, we've asked that the authors provide it to us first because they know the significance of the image that they want included in the book. And I'm happy to teach them how to write it, but it does help to come from their perspective.
Yeah, same with us. Like, we weren't able to do like very involved consultation, but I want to make sure that going forward it's part of the consultation we do with authors along the way, because basically just what Sarah said, and the back and forth I was having with authors was largely to do with format and because the reflowable is reflowable EPUB is the one that's like prioritized for most genres, but there was some hesitation from some of our poets, as I think I mentioned, and so there was an education piece too about like what is the most effective way to present something like poetry on a screen versus on a page, and choices that the individual authors made around how widely available they wanted those reflowable ones to be, and but I would highly recommend that authors be involved to whatever extent possible. And I think it makes sense what Sarah said to have the authors from the outset, if there's any images that require alt text, that they be the ones generating them with support, of course, as needed. But it doesn't make sense for us to be generating them in ways that aren't reflective of how they'd like to have those images described, right?
Absolutely. All right, this, I believe, is a question for everyone involved. How did this project involve participation from print disabled readers or experts?
Well, I mean, we are now working with Nels and Sela they are also, I guess, testing a batch of files from our project to make sure that everything is in line and that our files can be deposited within those systems. So that's been an important sort of collaborative piece there within Canada. Originally, we had hoped to work with a version company that was at least partly based in Canada, but that didn't work out by the time our project actually came to fruition. So it is with a project this big, it was actually one of our challenges to find Canadian suppliers who had the capacity to tackle such a large collection in the timeframes that we had to work with through our grant. So I think for a large part, it was we haven't been able to work with a large number of print disabled vendors or specialists at this point. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else has a different experience.
Excellent. All right, we will tackle one of the many other fascinating questions coming through to us. We've talked a little bit about sort of the challenges of presenting books accessibly in a digital format. One of our attendees is curious whether the emphasis on accessible book conversion has caused you as publishers to think about accessibility in other areas or aspects of the business you do, for example, events, readings, sort of other marketing and publicity opportunities. Yeah, anything you'd like to share on that?
I'll just jump in. For sure it has. We are, I think, currently having our websites audited for accessibility and for other updates that need to be made. But we also, I believe, have closed captioning on any virtual events that we do. And I think, I don't do this anymore, but I think our social media, our marketing assistant puts in alt text and tries to make our social media posts accessible as well. I'm fairly certain that she told me that.
Yeah, and I know that for some of the other publishing members of the LPG, they are looking at accessibility in different ways. We've had publishers who have done Braille editions recently, working with the CNAB. We have a couple of other publishers who are starting to tackle the idea of accessibility within a print book. So the font choices that are being made, the layout choices, the size of margins, that kind of thing, are they as accessible as they can be as a product? There is a lot of training obviously going on in the accessible digital book space. We have a lot of members who are doing the Benetext certifications or looking for other certifications and training. We are increasing our own PD around our professional development around accessibility, the Onyx part of it, the actual conversion part of it. And what else are we doing? I think that we're undertaking changes to our website as well, specifically to support this collection, but also more generally to make all of our content more accessible to the reading audience.
I would say for us, like being involved in this project is building on some of the sort of conversations and attempts and growing commitments around accessibility, like more broadly. Like, I mean, I think in-person event accessibility, while we don't always, well, we never get it as great as we could, it has kind of always been more on our radar, maybe because Oliver and I just like come from a community organizing background. So that's sort of like, whereas building accessibility into production wasn't as like intuitive for us, even though it, like philosophically or politically is something that we are that like we are aligned with. But in the like we've been involved in this throughout the pandemic period, and so we've also been thinking about what accessibility means in terms of the different ways we program online. So yeah, also we like, you know, hire live captioners for our events, trying to learn like I don't know. We like also support or like have a collaborative like disability justice oriented like online writing group that one of our like collaborative community members runs, and we've like also been consulting with the main person on that around some of the different things that could be shifting like digitally around all text in the terms of social media, these kinds of things. It's the kind of thing that we are constantly recognizing, like knowledge gaps, and not just knowledge but like follow through gaps, the more we learn about. But I think this project is like part of a bigger I don't know, expansive thinking that's always like required, I would say, like across all aspects of the work we're doing, and that we have like tons of scope to be doing better and want to keep doing so. I guess.
Yeah, constant growth, improvement for all of us all the time. Actually, a really great segue. There are some great questions here that are much more specific into formatting, which I think we might be able to better handle through another avenue, like a blog post or something that we can follow up with our fine panelists about. But I think a good closing question for right now is to talk a bit about what's next for the project and what from this project you're taking forward into the work you're continuing to do as publishers and service organizations.
Well, I can say we are definitely looking to do another round, another convert project. We did learn a lot. So as I say, there will be a lot more information up front in order to help our publishers sort of structure their submissions and understand the time commitments that this will take, and hopefully provide more resources up front. You know, the accessible publishing learning network didn't exist when we started our project, so we had to create our own resource center, and I think having that amazing set of resources available to everyone right from the get-go, so if you're thinking about doing this, you can start learning about it to better understand what will be involved and what's needed. And that's an advantage we just did not have the first go around. I think that generally the rest of the industry is catching up. So there will be, more places where that onyx is surfaced, and there will be better opportunities and, more support to sort of promote and see these collections get the attention that they deserve. So I'm really excited about what's coming in this space, and as we all work towards the 24 and 2025 accessibility goals, I think there's going to be a lot of innovation here.
From eBOUND's perspective, we've also learned a lot from this project, and for future projects, we're definitely looking to improve QA processes across the board, especially with the conversion partners, giving them the knowledge and lessons that we've learned with this project. And then we're increasing our QA percentage as well for these projects, and we're going to continue to offer individual support for publishers during their review process. So definitely, I think QA is a very, very big part of these projects, and we want to make sure that the books are in the best shape possible.
Awesome. Well, this has been a illuminating hour of content from all of you, and so much information about a really exciting project. Thank you so much, Tan, Sahiba, Sarah, and Ashley for joining us today. Before we all log off for the rest of the afternoon, we'd love it if you could provide feedback on the session. We will drop a survey link in the chat. Please take a couple of minutes to fill it out before you move along with the rest of your afternoon. We will also be emailing a link to the recording of the session as soon as it is available. And lastly, of course, we would like to thank the Department of Canadian Heritage for their support through the Canada Book Fund. And thank you to all of you attendees for attending.